So today we are talking about the birth of Robbins Pellegrino, a business brokerage firm. We're super excited about getting started together here, man. And you know, I think what's best is to kind of start off with just simple, right? What inspired you to kind of create a brokerage to begin with? Because I know this isn't your first brokerage. So tell me a little bit about what led you to it in the first place.
Sure. So a little bit of that was necessity, like all good things are, and then kind of opportunity. So my stepdad was in the business brokering business before. He moved before he was my stepdad, moved back into town. We connected and he said, "Hey, listen, I think you'd be really good as a business broker, but I don't want to be the face of it. I don't want to be in the middle of it. I want to train you, and let's partner up." So that's how it started with my first brokerage. At the time, I was taking care of my grandmother and needed something that I could do primarily from home. And therefore, Robbins Business Group was born, which was my first brokerage. Great success, kind of did an offshoot and had a sister brokerage. And then ultimately, my stepdad and I, he opened his own brokerage and we kind of went our separate ways in a good way once I had hit volume and he had taught me all these things. And I realized that ultimately I still really liked it and wanted to do it long term, that I was good at the relationship piece and that the brokering kind of came natural for me. That's kind of really where I started in the industry.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Yeah, I find it so interesting because I have been tangentially just rubbing elbows with business brokerage for years. My former partner years ago was a business broker before we were partners, and I unintentionally learned a ton about the industry, just even what's possible, right? Because I think the average person, even the average business owner, they can't wrap their head around the idea of business sales. They know that it's sort of the pot of gold at the end of their rainbow. They hope, but they don't really understand the ins and outs of this. Everything is based on a lot of assumption. And I think a lot of that has to do with my observation is that, the industry, the business brokerage industry itself is so archaic and just old. What do you think of that?
Sure. I mean, there are just a small number relative to everyone thinks that the greater real estate industry with residential agents and commercial agents, but there's a small fraction of us that do business brokering, and then an even smaller fraction that's under 50, and probably just the 1% of 1% that's under 40. So yeah, the business brokering industry as a whole is aged. Kind of a mom and pop kind of do it. I'm gonna be 60 years old and my wife is gonna be my receptionist and I'm just gonna come do what's available to me, kind of low hanging fruit. So I really saw kind of a need and a want to be able to change that. I saw that there was a need in the industry for some younger blood. And then I've really been, my clients that I've worked with have really been like, wow, this is not just your stereotypical, old guy in a suit type of relationship. But yeah,
sure.
definitely I think the archaic is probably a great word for where the business brokering industry has been.
Yeah. And I think when something is archaic, particularly in this, it's 2024 now, in this generation, it's difficult for these guys to almost communicate what they do, right? It's sort of just like, all right, business brokering, I'm transacting, excuse me, I'm running these transactions. It's very I don't know, it's just very milk toast to the average person, right? And so you end up, that's where these sort of assumptions build up with business owners where they have an idea, they know this is happening. They know that the buying and selling of business is happening and they hope that it's going to happen to them, but they don't understand the ins and outs of it. And, man, I think it's, I know that, your mentor is your stepfather, Gerard Perillo. And, he just released his book, The Sharkpreneur, which is awesome, by the way. But it's so interesting to kind of hear from him in his words, just the basics, right? And from the perspective of of what a business owner needs to understand, right? The basics of, how to value your business, and really what does that even mean? What's taken into consideration, and all this kind of stuff. It's just it's beyond so many people, and I think having a couple of young bucks like you and I in our mid 30s, I think that's what the industry needs.
Sure, and I think maybe a point that isn't made enough is that right now there is a decent amount of baby boomers retiring. And they're at a
Mm,
certain age, and that's good for them, and they've done the hard work, and I want them to get out, retire, go on to their next venture. And they're still comfortable being represented by an old man in a suit. But what's going to happen as in the next 10, 15 years is all the young bucks right now in their early 20s are going to be 35, 40 years old, and they don't want to be represented they want a peer representing them. So really it's a great opportunity that there's a bunch of young people in business that it didn't take them 20 years to get to their mountaintop, and they're ready to exit now, and they want to be represented by a peer. And I think that's a great opportunity for us
yeah.
and the industry as a whole.
No, I totally agree, and I think um, I think it's not just about the actual relationship that you have with with the seller or the buyer, and how that relationship is improved by having a peer, right? But it is also the general communication around the industry, right? Because we are younger guys, because we're part of this generation, and then you sort of add in your experience, my marketing background. Now we're able to communicate you
Sure.
know what this really looks like, and encourage business owners uh, you know that they need to sell, right? I mean, not everybody, right? But the ones that are positioned for it, it's encouraging them and helping them to understand that it is possible, and it's quite possibly even better than you ever expected it could be,
I
right?
think we're uniquely positioned to move them forward faster. Between your marketing background, the fact that we're a peer, the fact that with my experience, we can put that all together and ultimately get to move them quicker to whatever exit they're looking for.
Well, I mean, what would you say, typical to the industry is if I list my business, what is the typical broker going to do with that, and how long are they going to take to kind of get me to a point where I've sold my business?
Sure. And this is where I tell every business owner, and I'm absolutely probably too honest at what the industry will do, because this is what the industry is going to do. If I'm just the regular old mill broker, I'm going to list your business for an inflated price at a commission that makes my wallet happy, and I'm going to sit on it. And I'm going to wait until someone random comes up to me, calls me, emails me, whatever, to buy your business. And therefore, I don't have to share it with anybody. I don't really have to work for it. And I'm going to do all the necessary things that I told you I'm going to do. I'm going to tell that, I'm going to make a marketing packet. I'm going to make a few phone calls, but ultimately I'm going to sit on my hands and let that business sell itself. That's what the typical business broker does, whether they want to admit it or not. Only the good ones, the decent ones, and the ones actually worth their salt are going to actively communicate with the business owner, are going to set reasonable expectations, and also market the business or be able to have the connections to be able to ultimately sell the business. Because whether the business owner tries to sell it on their own or whether the business broker sells it, using a broker, 85% of businesses end up not selling. And that's because there needs to be a price adjustment, or because the business should have never gone live because the broker didn't do their job. There was work to be done ahead of that. So in short, that's what the typical business broker is going to do. You and I are positioned enough to be able to tell them the truth, to be either position them in a place that we can get their financials to a point where it makes sense for them to list. And then once we press go, we've got in-house capabilities to be able to put that business in front of those who need to see it. And I think that's what is the game changer. People always promise they have a list, Rolodex of people they're going to call, but really, the proof's in the pudding, right? Can they make the call, and can you get it done?
100%. And I think one of the other things that I love about what we're doing, and really your style of brokering, is we're not just tossing this out there and trying to get the quickest buyer, right? We're trying to get the right buyer, the
Mhm.
ideal buyer for that particular business property. And I think that's a real I think that's a real assurance for business owners, because I know a lot of business owners. I mean, even I recently acquired a company, and I remember the owner of the business that I acquired. He was so worried about selling the business because he didn't know who he was going to be selling it to, and even though he was exiting the business, it's still his baby. And yeah,
That's
you
right.
want to cash out, but you don't want your company to go to crap, right, as a result of an acquisition, because you're thinking about your employees, you're thinking about your vendor relationships. Like, these are all people independent of the business that you were conducting with them. And so there is this sort of angst that, business owners may be feeling about, man, I don't want to just put my thing on the market and then just sell it to anybody, right? And, part of what we do is we are effectively handpicking the ideal buyer for this particular business. We're looking at our network and our expansive network that has been built over years and years, and we're looking at who is the best fit for this opportunity. Who is this opportunity a great opportunity for, right?
Yeah.
And
Well,
that's I think that's a
look,
huge
it
a
reminds
huge
me of a
thing.
story, Joe. I had a client a couple of years ago that was just so worried about selling his $25 million company because of his relationship with his Coke vendor, because his Coke vendor always bought him SEC championship tickets. And he was willing to not make $26 million because he was worried about not having those SEC championship tickets. So what did I do? I found him a buyer that not only gave him his $26 million, but they went to the SEC championship last year
There
together,
you go.
right? And ultimately, we can't forget there are people on both sides of this, and that person was worried about his vendor rather than $25 million that was going to be in front of them. But it was a win-win because I ultimately said, hey, listen, you can buy this company over here, but I'm going to need you to take my guy to the SEC championship this year and next year and every year. And 2 years go and they've gone together.
That's
So it's just kind
amazing.
of just kind of funny.
That is really, really funny. And I think that's such a great example, and that really speaks to the level of care that we have for our clients, and we
Mm-hmm.
have for these aren't just transactions, right? Like you said, it's the people behind it. Um, and yeah, so let me ask you, what would you? I mean, I think we've made it very clear how Robbins Pellegrino is different than the average broker, but how? What would you say to a business owner who is considering selling, but is just kind of, you know, they have the attitude of like, I'll do it later. You know, I'll try to fulfill more contracts and try to make a couple more dollars. But ultimately, I'm going to sell later, not today. What would you say to that guy?
Sure, I'm going to tell them that I hope that works out for them. And then I'm going to follow up with that. There's some work that could be done now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we can't sell anything without evaluation. So I always do evaluation up front, and I would probably that business owner they need to let me do evaluation so that we can compare apples to apples. So maybe they see, they just closed out 2023 and it was a fantastic year. This might be the optimal time to sell based off what their the last 3 years, because you don't want to be at the peak of your mountain and then coming down trying to sell. You want to identify where you are in that curve, because the curves are going to happen in the life of the business. You're either going up, down. Very often do you stay plateaued. So you want to identify where you are and where that business is, and then ultimately make an informed decision based off the valuation of the business, based off what you're doing, your expectations, and where you want to be. If you're thinking, yeah, I might want to sell, but I don't need to right now, but yet all the conversations I'm having with you are you telling me how excited you are about your new grandbaby, then it might be time to have that conversation. And it takes very, very few businesses do I jump on a phone call with the owner and they're ready to go immediately. There's typically work that needs to be done either on the books or positioning them to sell. So you may, even if when the time comes and they're ready to go, there might be 3 months worth of work to be done. And then we're just 3 months more down the road.
Mm-hmm.
So I tell that business owner that ultimately let's get evaluation. Let's see where we are and then make an informed decision of whether or not later makes sense.
Isn't it funny how few business owners actually know what their value is?
Yeah, next to none, right? I mean, I think it's something staggering, like 85 to 90%. I will never forget my business partner and I. Like he was a month away
Wow.
from closing his door and just retiring. Instead, 6 months later, we gave him $350,000 to close his door. And that's just because he didn't know the value of his business. Didn't even know there was a worth to it.
Right.
After 20 years in the business, he didn't realize that he had a bunch of goodwill, and those contracts he had were worth something.
I think sometimes business owners they get so almost like such tunnel vision about their own business, right? You know, there's the illustration of, are you looking at the trees or are you looking at the forest? And I think a lot of times business owners are really just looking at the trees, the good ones, right? The ones that are really working hard and putting a lot into their businesses. You know, they're looking at the trees and they find it very, very difficult to zoom out and see what they've actually built and what they've actually created. And at the end of the day, the only real way of doing that is getting a valuation done. There's a lot of different tools, and we can talk about that another time. There's a lot of different ways to get that valuation done. But at the end of the day, that's a bench. That's a key performance indicator that they need in order to progress. So if they're gonna have that mentality of later, okay, later, but based on what? Right? Like
Sure.
where are you today? And then yeah, if you want to sell in 3 years, great. But you got to know what your value is today in order to make that assessment.
100% business valuations are not meant just for when it's time to exit. You've said it just right. They're benchmarks. They let you know when it's time to exit, or what you need to work on, or what you could do better, on a quarterly, yearly basis. That I will always be a big advocate that even if you don't want to sell right now, get yourself a valuation at least once a year so that you can have something tangible in your hand to say, listen, I need to do this better, or I need to fix this or that, to position yourself ultimately for that exit.
Mm-hmm. All right. So you've largely, in the last handful of years, you've largely been focusing in on fuel stations and related assets. First of all, tell me a little bit about that from a high level. Like what got you into fuel in the first place, and tell me a little bit just about that industry generally.
Sure. So it is my new favorite thing, just because it's been good to me. But ultimately, several years ago, I walked into a gas station after I had gone to a workout. Was in gym clothes, bought a bottle of water because forgot my bottle of water at the gym. And the gentleman behind the register was the owner, and he asked me what I did for a living, and I told him I owned a business brokerage. He said, "What is that?" That's always the follow-up question, most of the time. I told him, "Well, I help people buy and sell businesses." And he followed up with, meaning, if I needed another gas station, you could find me one. Well, 4 months later, we closed on a gas station for him in a nearby city. He introduced me to his friend. I sold three more gas stations to his friend. That friend introduced me to what are called wholesale jobbers, which are basically people who supply fuel to gas stations. So every time you see a gas station, there's the operator inside, there's a landlord, and there's a fuel supply contractor. Sometimes they're the same person, sometimes they're not. And ultimately, I got in contact with one of those large jobbers, and realized quickly that it was just as hard to sell one as it was to sell five at a time. And therefore, I found that niche, made a bunch of connections in the market, and ultimately closed over $250 million in fuel. And then with that, I'm looking in 2024 right now. I was just jotting things down. Over just happened in 3 days, so you never know how the world's going to turn. Looking at another $250 million, possibly pending, all fuel related. So
Wow.
that's high level. That's what I do. I operate with a handful of clients that all own 300 plus gas stations, and I am shopping for them. If a station is sold in the South, I probably know about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I do nation. So
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about that, right? The main street and really what that means, right? Because you know we don't deal necessarily in the large conglomerate transactions. We're not
sure.
looking for we're looking for
So we're the
you know,
small business owners, our
right,
person.
right.
But what small business means, anywhere from 1 million to 5 million in revenue. So you can still have a nice, sizable business that is classified as a small business, right? But primarily, we're looking at serving businesses that do 1 million to $5 million in revenue, and they probably cash flow $2 million or less. So that's kind of our sweet spot in any industry, because once you get to that level of $1 million, $500,000 in cash flow, There are able and willing buyers, whether that's big, larger regional competition for that business owner, or whether that's a private equity firm, whether that's a specialized group that's going after. You get to that level of about a $500,000 to $1 million in cash flow. You can widen your audience of who might purchase your business. Um, with my fuel and gas, my average listing is like $25-30 million. So that's more of a mergers and acquisitions type of level. Still business brokering, but it's at a slightly elevated, different level in terms of Main Street. You've got companies that are grossing $140 million, and that's just a little bit different. Love it. Don't want to give that up, but really excited to getting back to seeing people in my community that are selling, or neighboring. It's your next door neighbor that's selling when you do Main Street, and I'm excited to bring my services kind of down to the Main Street level.
Yeah. I've always said that I just have such a passion for the concept of small business, not just for myself, but like you said, for my neighbor, right?
Yeah, it's the backbone of America.
It is that 100% that's the case. And I am a big believer in that American spirit of entrepreneurship, right? And, we are in this country uniquely positioned for small business in a way that other countries just aren't, right?
Yep.
My wife is from the UK, spent a lot of time there. They, in the grand scheme of the world, they definitely have a more friendly business environment, but compared to the US, it's just entirely different. My mother-in-law is an accountant over there, and, the hoops that have to be jumped through just to get started are so much more significant than here, where yes, there's regulation, but it's not so prohibitive that someone can't get started.
No, it's $150. Register with your state and open a bank account, and you can go make money.
And
I mean,
check back with us next year, like
right?
literally.
Yeah, I mean, America has a lot of things going for it, and that's one of them.
That is one of the huge
You
things.
know, it's a beautiful thing that they, yes, if you can think it and you have a plan to implement it, you can do it in the U.S.
Yep.
And ultimately, I want to reward people's hard work when it comes time for them to transition, whether that's retirement or whether that's a different venture or.
I love that, man. I love that, and I am 100% on the same page with that. I mean, that's yeah. If you look back at 4 or 5 years ago, I was recording some content and I was specifically calling this exact thing out, right? Again, just the freedom to be able to run our businesses and then ultimately be rewarded for it at the end of the day. Sometimes getting taxed up the wazoo at the end of it, but there are ways around. There's ways to manage that,
That's
right?
right. There's conversations to be had. I've got people, that the beauty of what another kind of thing that I hope we share is that in our brokerage, we kind of want to be a one-stop shop in the sense that if it's not a service that we offer, we're going to connect you to a third party that we trust, that we know, and we've done business with in the past. So if that's a financial planner, or if that's an accountant, or if that's a wealth advisor, what have you, I'm going to have a personal relationship with them, and I can make that referral, and therefore, hopefully that business owner doesn't get taxed to the wazoo. But I like the idea of being able to take it from start to finish for sure.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. So as we look at 2024, right, where today's January 4th, so we're right at the beginning of the year. What are your kind of just general high level projections for the year as it relates to the market? I mean, is this a good time generally, independent of industry or numbers or anything like that? Is this a good time to be looking at selling? Is this a time where we want to hold and wait and see? What do you kind of see for 2024?
Sure. I tell everyone I don't have a crystal ball, right? I am in deep thought and prayer like everybody else is. But if I take my conventional wisdom and I take my experience, this is what I would tell any business owner looking at, okay, the calendar year has turned. Here I am. I'm going to have to go up and do this business thing all over again. Is to consider what you want for this year and next year. Do you want to be in a place where you can quiet down, where you can settle or are you in a place where you're just super excited about what you're doing and you're just totally amped up and it doesn't really matter what the economy is doing? You need to judge where you are personally. And then you need to understand that election years are different years. And they either cause things to go up or down, and there's a little bit of unknown there, right? You're going to have a segment of people who think the economy is going to do better if a Republican's in office again, and you're going to have a segment of people who think that the status quo is fine and we want to keep a Democrat. You just really, but there's that unknown piece. So I can't tell you there's promise that interest rates are going to go down, and at some level for home buying, that's great. For the lending side, I don't know. It's a half a dozen here, 6 over there. So what I would tell anybody was, I'd go get your valuation, have a starting point, see
Yeah.
where you are, and then have a conversation with a reputable broker that you trust to see whether or not timing for a sale is right now, or because you've got the outside influence, the economy, politics, the world, but then you've got, what is your business doing? Is it healthy and in a place that it makes sense that 2024 is a time to sell, or does it need 6 more months of revenue to boost those numbers to be able to get the payout that you want? You don't know that unless you have a valuation.
Yeah.
So I would start 2024 with a valuation, a starting point, a foundation, so that you can make a reasonable, informed decision.
Yeah, I think, 2024, from my perspective, I think it is there is we are set up for the most potential volatility that we have been in years past with this coming year, from an
Sure.
economic perspective, from a political perspective. These are all things that we could see things going in many different directions in many different ways. And we've seen, just even in the last 4 years, starting with COVID, that
Mm.
people react to things very, very quickly. And sometimes things don't behave in the way that you expect them to. I mean,
Sure.
remember the first 2 weeks of COVID, stocks just crashed. I bought up everything, and then everything bounced back, and it bounced back fairly quickly, right?
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
in the grand scheme of things, and you don't know what crazy things are going to do. I mean, you know, then you bring into it, what the Fed is saying about lowering interest rates. Okay, well, what if they don't? What if that has an adverse effect on inflation? I mean, there's so many variables. And then the elections, right, where you've got both sides are set up to effectively not trust the results of the election this
Sure.
year,
Sure.
right? And that's a scary thing culturally. And what does all that mean in the grand scheme of the economy? However, what I do think is super interesting about business is that unless you're in a highly volatile industry, it kind of doesn't really matter, right? All of those things,
There
it
are
will,
a lot of there are a lot of industries that are insulated from
right?
a bad economy, or a slowing economy, right? Um, People are going to vacation. They may not fly to Hawaii. They may come to Florida, right? But they're going to go on a vacation. Um, People still need, when their AC goes out at home, they still need AC in the summertime. You still need a t-shirt to wear. So yes, business in some degree, you can feel, unless you're, like you said, in a really volatile market. So I would, thinking back now, if I'm just going to give someone advice for 2024 that's leaning more towards selling, I would say go ahead and get that valuation, start that process first quarter, because closer to election, you're going to have, not, you won't pause, but there might be lenders, those that hold the money,
They're just
or
waiting.
potential purchasers that say, I'm going to hold. And they're not just going to hold through November, they're going to hold through the whole election,
Mm-hmm.
6 months post election.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so there is the turn of the year. There's money to be had. There's new pots. It's funny how this works. All of a sudden, new calendar year, and pots of gold show up for different people, different reasons for on the lending side.
Yeah.
Um, so I would say first quarter, go and see what you can get, because
Yeah.
if you wait much longer, you may be waiting an additional year, whether you want to or not. And it's not because you did something wrong or a potential purchaser did something wrong. It's because it's going to be a more hold pattern.
100%. Like you said, we don't have that crystal ball. So all we can do is lean in on our metrics, knowing what our value is currently, knowing knowing what we're set up for. And I think, for the business owner that's considering selling their business, yeah, I mean, start with the valuation, but really start considering what it could look like, right? Like what could it look like? Dream a little bit. You know what I mean?
Now, I'd like to make another point too, now that I'm sitting here thinking about it,
Yeah,
is that I think you're going to still see maybe the same level of acquisitions that happened in 2023 happen in 2024, but you're going to have people more conservative, right? Your potential purchasers are going to be more conservative. So what that means to a potential business owner means the good business gets picked first. And what I mean by that is that those that have their numbers in order, those that the cash flow makes sense, those that have operated uh, the way they should, right? That they're not just kind of sporadic or hanging by a thread. So really get your house in order if you're thinking about selling. Make sure you're staffed appropriate. Make sure that your margins are right. Make sure all of those housekeeping items that you can control, you control to make yourself that shiny little gem that those nice conservative buyers are going to grab first, because we might slow or people might pause in purchasing, but they're ultimately going to grab the businesses that make money, make sense, and are operated well. So if you can do all of those things, you're still ultimately going to be picked for an acquisition.